My parents forgot my birthday for the 5th year straight, so I did something to make sure they won't forget again. 5 years ago, I thought my parents forgetting my birthday was just a fluke. Today, sitting at my desk while my colleagues sing happy birthday to someone whose name they barely know, I realize it's become a pattern that defines our entire relationship. I'm 26 years old, and yesterday was my birthday. Again, my parents forgot. Again, I pretended it didn't matter. But this time, I've decided to do something that will ensure they never forget another birthday for the rest of their lives. My name is Nathan, and I've been invisible to my parents for most of my adult life. Growing up, things were different. My father, Victor, worked as an accountant for a small firm, and my mother, Diane, was a part-time receptionist at a doctor's office. They weren't wealthy, but they were present. Birthdays were small celebrations with homemade cake and a few modest gifts. Nothing extravagant, but they remembered. They cared enough to mark the day I came into the world. The change started when I turned 21. My younger sister Amber was 18 and heading to college on a full academic scholarship to study pre-med. Suddenly, every conversation in our house revolved around Amber's achievements, Amber's future, Amber's needs. I had just graduated with a degree in graphic design and was struggling to find work in a competitive field. While Amber was the golden child with a clear path to success, I was the son who'd chosen a career my parents didn't understand or particularly respect. That first forgotten birthday in 2019 hurt, but I rationalized it. Amber was starting college. My parents were stressed about finances and her transition to university life. They had a lot on their minds. When I mentioned it had been my birthday a few days later, Mom looked genuinely shocked and apologetic. She promised to make it up to me with a belated dinner, which we did have the following weekend. I thought it was an isolated incident. The second forgotten birthday in 2020 was harder to excuse. By then, I'd found steady work at a marketing agency and was living in my own apartment. Amber was thriving at college, making Dean's List and getting involved in research projects. My parents called her weekly, sometimes daily. My calls went to voicemail more often than not. When my birthday passed without acknowledgement again, I waited a week before bringing it up. This time, Mom's apology felt more perfunctory, and the makeup dinner never happened. By 2021, I'd stopped expecting anything. I spent my birthday alone in my apartment, ordering takeout and watching Netflix. I didn't mention it to my parents at all, curious to see if they'd remember on their own. They didn't. 3 weeks later, during a family dinner, Dad mentioned something about Amber's upcoming birthday plans. The casual way he discussed her celebration, while having completely forgotten mine, felt like a physical blow. The pattern continued in 2022 and 2023. Each year, I'd wake up on October 15th with diminishing hope. Each year brought the familiar ache of being forgotten by the people who should remember me most. What made it worse was watching how they treated Amber's birthday each year. Her celebration in 2023 was particularly elaborate. Surprise party at a nice restaurant, extended family invited, social media posts about their brilliant daughter turning 23. The contrast was stark and painful. I started keeping track of their communication patterns, partly out of curiosity and partly out of masochism. They called Amber an average of 3 times per week. They called me maybe once every 2 weeks, usually when they needed technical help with their computer or wanted me to house sit while they visited Amber at college. Our conversations were functional rather than personal. They knew the basic facts about my job, but showed little interest in my actual life. The worst part wasn't just being forgotten, it was being taken for granted. I was the reliable son who'd show up for family dinners, help with household projects, and provide free tech support without complaint. I was useful but not celebrated, present but not particularly valued. Amber was the source of pride. I was the source of convenience. During family gatherings, I'd watch how differently they interacted with each of us. When Amber spoke about her studies, they'd lean forward with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions and offering encouragement. When I mentioned work projects or personal achievements, they'd nod politely before changing the subject. It was as if my life existed in their peripheral vision while Amber occupied center stage. The financial disparity in their support was equally telling. They'd helped Amber with college expenses, bought her a reliable car for campus, and regularly sent care packages. Meanwhile, I'd paid my own way through school and received hand-me-down furniture when I moved into my apartment. They rationalized this by saying I was more independent and didn't need as much help, but it felt more like they simply cared less about my success. Last month, something shifted in my perspective. I was at a friend's birthday party, watching his parents fuss over him with obvious affection. His father gave a toast about how proud he was of his son's accomplishments and character. I felt envious in a way that surprised me. I realized I couldn't remember the last time my parents had expressed genuine pride in anything I'd done. That's when I started planning. Not revenge, exactly, but a way to ensure they'd never forget my birthday again. A gesture so significant that October 15th would be permanently etched in their memory. Something that would force them to confront how they'd been treating me and make them understand what they'd been missing. The plan required careful preparation and significant financial sacrifice, but I'd been saving money for years with no particular goal in mind. Now I had a purpose for those savings. I was going to give my parents a birthday gift they'd never forget. Not for me, but from me. Something so generous and unexpected that it would haunt them every October 15th for the rest of their lives. Yesterday was my 26th birthday. As expected, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no cards. But instead of feeling sorry for myself, I felt excited. Because today, I was going to set my plan in motion. The first phase of my plan began this morning with a phone call to my parents' mortgage company. I'd spent weeks researching their financial situation, which wasn't difficult since they'd been complaining about money troubles for the past year. Dad's accounting firm had downsized, cutting his hours and reducing his salary. Mom had taken on extra shifts at the doctor's office, but medical reception work doesn't pay particularly well. They'd been struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments on the house they'd owned for 15 years. What they didn't know was that I'd been monitoring their situation more closely than they realized. I'd noticed the stress in Mom's voice during our infrequent phone calls, the way Dad looked older and more tired during family dinners. I'd overheard conversations about potentially refinancing or even selling the house. They were proud people who wouldn't ask for help, especially from the son they'd consistently overlooked. That's what made my plan so perfect. After speaking with their mortgage company and confirming the details I'd suspected, I drove to the bank and arranged for a cashier's check. The amount was substantial, $47,000, which represented most of my savings accumulated over 5 years of living modestly and working steadily. It was enough to pay off the remaining balance on their mortgage completely. The second phase involved careful timing and presentation. I wanted maximum emotional impact, which meant delivering this gift in a way that would create lasting memory. I'd prepared a simple card explaining that this was a belated birthday gift to myself, the gift of knowing my parents could live without financial stress about their home. I scheduled the delivery for today, exactly 24 hours after my forgotten birthday. Around noon, I called Mom at work. I told her I'd arranged for something important to be delivered to their house this afternoon and asked if she could be home by 3 p.m. to receive it. She sounded curious, but agreed, probably assuming it was a package I'd ordered and shipped to their address for convenience. I spent the afternoon at a coffee shop near their neighborhood, too nervous to concentrate on work. This wasn't just about the money, though $47,000 represented years of sacrifice and careful budgeting. It was about forcing a moment of recognition, creating a memory so powerful that they'd never be able to forget the date again. At 3:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mom, and she was crying. She could barely speak through her tears, asking me what I'd done, why I'd done it, how I'd managed to do it. In the background, I could hear Dad asking what was happening, then his own voice getting emotional as Mom explained. They wanted to see me immediately. I drove to their house and found them both in the living room, still holding the cashier's check and my card. Mom hugged me tighter than she had in years, and Dad kept shaking his head in disbelief. They had questions about how I'd afforded such a gift, whether I'd put myself in financial jeopardy, why I'd chosen to do this now. I explained that I'd been saving money for years, that I lived well below my means, and that I'd wanted to help them achieve financial security. What I didn't tell them was the real motivation, that this was my birthday gift to myself, ensuring they'd never forget October 15th again. I let them believe it was simply generosity, a son wanting to help his struggling parents. The conversation that followed was the longest and most emotionally honest we'd had in years. They talked about their financial stress, their fear of losing the house, their pride that had prevented them from asking for help. Dad admitted that he'd been considering taking a second job, despite his age and health concerns. Mom confessed that she'd been losing sleep worrying about their future. They also talked about me in ways I hadn't heard before. They said they were proud of my independence, my steady career, my responsible financial management. They called me mature, generous, and thoughtful. These were compliments I'd been waiting years to hear, and while I felt grateful to finally receive them, I also felt bitter that it had taken a grand gesture to earn their recognition. As the evening progressed, they began making plans for their newfound financial freedom. They talked about home improvements they could finally afford, trips they might take, ways they could help Amber with medical school expenses. I listened and nodded, but part of me was calculating whether this expensive gesture would actually change anything about our relationship or just make them more comfortable while continuing to overlook me. Before I left that night, Mom mentioned that they wanted to take me out for a special dinner to celebrate my gift and express their gratitude. She suggested we go to the nicest restaurant in town, make it a real occasion. I agreed, but I also made a subtle suggestion that we make it an annual tradition every October 15th to celebrate this moment and what it meant for our family. Mom looked confused for a moment, asking why October 15th specifically. The irony was perfect. Here we were, less than 48 hours after my forgotten birthday, and she still didn't realize the significance of the date I'd chosen. I simply said it was the day I'd made the mortgage payment, so it seemed appropriate to commemorate it annually. Dad agreed enthusiastically, saying that October 15th would become a special day for our family, a reminder of generosity and love. He had no idea he was committing to celebrating my birthday every year without realizing it. The beautiful irony of the situation almost made me laugh out loud. Driving home that night, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. My plan was working perfectly. They'd never forget October 15th again. But I also realized that I'd essentially had to buy their attention and gratitude. The recognition I'd craved for years had finally come, but at the cost of most of my savings and through a gesture they didn't fully understand. Still, as I looked at the text messages they'd sent me after I left, expressions of love, gratitude, and amazement at my generosity, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Amber started college, I felt like I mattered to my parents. Whether that feeling would last beyond the novelty of paid-off mortgage remained to be seen, but for now, it was enough. The weeks following my mortgage payment brought a whirlwind of attention I hadn't experienced in years. Mom called me twice that first week just to talk, not to ask for technical help or extend dinner invitations. Dad sent me articles about financial planning and investment strategies, treating me like someone whose opinion mattered. The shift felt surreal after years of being an afterthought. But as the initial excitement faded, I began to notice the familiar patterns reasserting themselves. Phone calls became less frequent. Conversations gradually returned to updates about Amber's medical school achievements. During family dinners, my mortgage payment would get mentioned briefly before the discussion inevitably shifted to my sister's research projects or upcoming clinical rotations. The real test came when Amber visited home for a long weekend 6 weeks after my payment. I watched my parents' excitement about her arrival, the special meals Mom planned, the attention they showered on her. They mentioned my gift to her, framing it as an example of my success and generosity, but their focus remained primarily on her studies and future prospects. I realized that my expensive gesture had earned me temporary recognition, but hadn't fundamentally changed our family dynamics. I was still the reliable son who helped when needed, but wasn't the source of ongoing pride and interest. My $47,000 had bought me a brief moment in the spotlight, but the spotlight had inevitably swung back to where it had always been focused. However, something interesting was happening as October 15th approached. Mom had mentioned our planned dinner celebrations several times, clearly excited about establishing this new family tradition. She'd made reservations at Bellacino's and had been talking about how meaningful it would be to commemorate such an important moment in our family's history. 3 days before the date, I decided to conduct an experiment. During a casual phone conversation with Mom, I asked if she remembered why we'd chosen October 15th specifically. There was a pause before she said it was the day I'd made the mortgage payment. I asked if the date had any other significance, if there might be another reason why I'd chosen it for such an important gesture. She thought for a moment, but couldn't come up with anything else. The conversation hung awkwardly in the air. I could sense her searching her memory, trying to figure out what she might be missing. I finally told her not to worry about it, that the mortgage payment was reason enough to celebrate. 2 days before our dinner, Amber called me unexpectedly. She thanked me for helping our parents and mentioned that she'd been looking at family photos recently. She'd noticed that October 15th was actually my birthday and wondered if there was a connection between my birthday and my decision to make such a significant gift on that date. For a moment, I considered telling her the truth. Instead, I deflected, saying that timing had been coincidental. She accepted my explanation, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. Before ending the call, she mentioned that she might try to come home for our celebration, since it was becoming an important family tradition. October 15th arrived with crisp autumn weather that had always made me love my birthday as a child. I woke up feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and melancholy. This would be the first time in 5 years that my parents would actually spend my birthday with me, even though they still had no idea that's what they were doing. I arrived at Bellacino's to find my parents already seated, dressed up for the occasion. Mom had brought a small wrapped gift which she placed beside my plate. The gesture touched me more than I expected. Amber arrived shortly after, looking tired from her drive, but genuinely happy to see everyone. Throughout dinner, they couldn't stop talking about the mortgage payment and what it meant for their future. The conversation flowed easily, covering their plans, Amber's medical school experiences, and my work projects. For the first time in years, I felt like an equal participant in family discussions rather than a peripheral figure. About halfway through dinner, Mom presented me with her gift, a framed photo from my college graduation that she'd found while going through old pictures. She said it reminded her of how proud they'd always been of me, even if they didn't express it often enough. The gift was thoughtful and meaningful, but it highlighted the central irony. They were giving me a birthday present without knowing it was my birthday. As we finished our main courses, Dad raised his wine glass and proposed a toast about family bonds and the importance of supporting each other. He said that October 15th would always remind them of how lucky they were to have such a thoughtful son. Amber added her own comments about being proud to have such a generous brother. Everyone looked at me expectantly, waiting for my response. This was my chance to reveal the truth, to explain why I'd chosen October 15th, to finally tell them this was actually my birthday. Instead, I thanked them for raising me to value family above material possessions and said that helping them had meant more to me than keeping the money. As we clinked glasses, I caught Amber looking at me with a knowing expression. There was something in her eyes suggesting she'd figured out the truth, but was choosing not to voice it. The moment passed quickly, but it left me wondering how much she actually understood. After dinner, we went to their house for coffee and store-bought cake. As we sat around the kitchen table, talking and laughing more freely than we had in years, I felt both satisfied and hollow. My plan had worked exactly as intended. October 15th was permanently etched in their memory, and they committed to celebrating it annually. But driving home that night, I realized that my revenge had transformed into something else entirely. I'd set out to ensure they'd never forget my birthday again, and I'd succeeded. But I'd also created genuine moments of connection that might not have existed otherwise. 6 months later, as I prepare for our second annual October 15th dinner, my parents have been planning it for weeks. They still don't remember it's my birthday, but they've made it into something even better, a day when our family comes together to celebrate love, generosity, and connection. My relationship with my parents isn't perfect, and they still shower more attention on Amber than me. But something fundamental has changed since that first dinner. I'm no longer invisible. I'm no longer taken for granted. I matter in ways I didn't before, and while it cost me most of my savings to earn that recognition, I've concluded it was worth the price. Sometimes the most effective way to be remembered isn't to demand attention, but to do something so memorable that forgetting becomes impossible. I gave my parents a gift they'll never forget, and in return, they gave me the recognition I'd been seeking for years. Next week, I'll celebrate my birthday with my family without them knowing it's my birthday. And for the first time in my adult life, that's perfectly fine with me.